All right, now that we've got the math out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what this means. So we can calculate this number, but that's only half the battle, right? We have to be able to use this information. We have to understand what this is telling us. So first of all, let's talk about what determines the price elasticity of demand. And again, as a firm who's trying to maximize their revenue or set their right price, this is really, really important to understand. So the primary thing that determines the elasticity of demand for a product is the availability of close substitutes. So the more substitutes that are available, the more elastic it is. So if you think about things where there is no close substitute, like gas, for example, we see it being less elastic. But if a consumer has lots of options available to them, as soon as the price of one thing goes up, they will switch to those substitutes. And it was not going to be the same for all people. Some people will consider Coke to be an adequate substitute for Pepsi, and some people will not. So it's going to be kind of, the elasticity is not going to be the same for everyone, as people have different ideas on what they consider adequate substitutes. But for instance, let's say it was going to the movies. And so if we define that as kind of just like entertainment, people have other, or just watching movies, people have other options available to them. So if the price of going to the movies goes up, people will tend to opt for Netflix or, streaming things like that, or even renting movies where they can get it cheaper. So if it's just the movie, some people go to the movies for, the whole big screen and the whole atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. So they might not consider watching at home an adequate substitute, but a lot of people would, and so they would, the more substitutes are available, the more elastic, the more people are going to react to a change in price because they have other options. Some of these other things are different determinants, but they're still kind of related to substitutes. For example, the passage of time. Okay, more time, the more time passes, the more elastic it is, and that's largely more elastic. And these would all work in the opposite direction too, right? So less substitutes equals less elastic. Um, But if we talk about the passage of time, the more time evolves, the more options you have. And so if the price of gas doubles tomorrow, most of us can't make our arrangements that fast. And so tomorrow, if you had to fill up your gas tomorrow, you still had to fill up your gas tomorrow, and you're going to get just as much. But over time, you can start to find ways to use less gas. You can develop a carpool to work. You can consolidate your trips to avoid that. And then the longer time goes, you can, next time you're buying a car, you can buy a smaller car. Now, if the price of gas suddenly doubles tomorrow, you can't go out, most of us can't just go out tomorrow and buy a new car. But if we're talking about a year from now maybe it's time, and I can buy a smaller car or an electric car or something like that to use more gas. And if we go even more time, like if we're talking like 50 years from now or something, then we probably would have had all kinds of alternatives, if the price stayed that high, all kinds of alternatives developed by then. So the longer the time, the more elastic it is, and that's mostly because you have more options the more time goes on. But in the short term, so you have things like gas where in the short term it's going to be very, very inelastic. But if you were to take that over 50 years, it would probably be very elastic because 50 years from now we'll probably have a lot more options. Another thing is whether a good is a luxury or a necessity. So, luxury goods tend to be more elastic because if the price goes up, you can just do without it, right? It's a luxury good, you don't need it. Whereas a necessity is less elastic. You might be able, like gas or electricity or something like that. If it's a necessity, you're going to buy it even if the price goes up because you have to. That's the definition of a necessity. And so you still need gas, you still need electricity. Again, you might find ways to use less of it. It's not perfectly inelastic. You're not just going to not get it, but you're going to find ways to use less of it. Another one is the definition of the market. And I have another slide on this, so I'm going to hold off on this one, but a lot of it is still related to substitutes. So a narrow definition of the market means it's very elastic, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So I'll come back to that one. But the last one is share, and again, this one kind of gets back to substitutes. But share of consumers' budget, uh, if it's a bigger percent of your budget, so big ticket items, it's going to be more elastic. You're going to respond more to a change in price, if only because you notice it more. Uh, so you're going to react more to a change in the price of cars or houses or whatever's a big part of your budget. It might be your cell phone bill or something like that. You're gonna react more to a change in that. So if your cell phone bill goes up 20 cents, that might prompt you to start looking around to other providers, other companies to get your cell phone with or something like that. Whereas if the price of coffee goes up 20%, you might not really notice it. So uh, you're going to see a bigger reaction to bigger things out there. Let's talk about the definition of the market. So, what is the price elasticity for breakfast cereal? And that depends whether you're talking about one specific brand, whether you're talking about a category, or just all breakfast cereals in general. So, the further down the list you go, this is very narrow definition, and this is very broad. And so the broader you get, the more substitutes, well, or the less substitutes you have. Okay, so if we're talking about a specific brand, okay, so it gets more elastic as we move down. So Post Raisin Bran, okay, it's very elastic. If the price of Post Raisin Bran goes up, people will switch to something else. Okay, so I could get a different Raisin Bran. There's more than one Raisin Bran in there, or just a different cereal altogether. So if the price of this one goes up, it's elastic. If I'm talking about all like family type cereals, because in your cereals you've got your healthy cereals and your kids sugary cereals and then just family cereals. So if we define it that way, all family type cereals, so it's not just the Post Raisin Bran, but the Raisin Bran and the Cheerios and the, I don't know, Frosted Mini Wheats, all of those have gone up. So you might switch to a different kind of cereal. If the price of all breakfast cereals goes up, then there's not as big a reaction because people are still going to largely buy cereal. Now, some people are going to switch and say, okay, well, then I'll just have, I don't know, granola bars or yogurt or something else for breakfast other than cereal. But for a lot of people, cereal is a staple. So if all the prices of cereal are going up, I'm still going to buy cereal. So it's not going to change it. But if the price of just one goes up, then I am going to respond because then I'll just switch to something else. So you'll see this if you'll see this elasticity if it's something that people just buy whatever brand is on sale. That means they're responding to a change in price and it's elastic. And you probably actually do see that with specific brands of cereals. If the sales go up, if the number of boxes sold goes up when it's on sale, then that would say that people are responding to that change in price. And uh, so that would be elastic. Okay, so that's kind of how we define elasticity. And again, as a firm, you need to know how many substitutes. Do people consider other things to be adequate substitutes? We're going to talk about revenue here in a second, but as a firm, you don't want people to think that other things are adequate substitutes for yours. So you might spend a lot of marketing dollars convincing people that this is the only one and other things are not an adequate substitute. And the reason you do that is because the more inelastic it is, the more control you have over the price. So it's important to understand where you fall in this. It's important to understand how customers perceive your product so that you know this. All right. So let's talk about demand and revenue because this is really important. If you're the owner of a business, you need to decide how many customers am I going to gain if I cut my price? What happens to my total revenue? Remember that example at the beginning, and your costs have been going up and you're being pressured to increase sales. Well, we know that if we drop our price, we will um, get additional sales, but how many are we going to get? Because the other thing we have to consider is that we're looking at total revenue here, right? So which is just the price times the quantity, the price per unit times the number of units that I sold. And so if I drop my price, I'm going to sell additional units. So let's say I drop my price from 250 to 225. But the fact is, I'm not just dropping it for those extra units I sold. All those people that would have been willing to pay 250 are now also getting it for 225. So I've given up revenue on all those other ones. And so is the increased volume enough to make up for the lower revenue per unit on all those people that would have been willing to pay it at the higher price? And that's really what we need to know. And that's what elasticity tells us. It helps us answer that question. So, um, let's say the demand for your product is inelastic. It's less than 1. That means customers are not very sensitive to your change. It means you're going to decrease your price. You're going to gain a few extra people, but not a lot. It also means if you raise your price, you're going to lose some, but you're not going to lose a lot. So in this case, if I drop my price, I gain a few extra people, but it's not going to be enough to make up for the lost revenue on all those people that would have been willing to pay the higher price. So my revenue would go down. So if it's price elastic and I decrease my price, my revenue would go down. So that's not a great idea. However, if the price of your product is elastic, then that means that customers are very sensitive. So if I decrease my price, I'm going to gain a lot of extra customers, which means the extra customers will I'm going to have enough extra customers that it will more than make up for the lower revenue on the people that would have paid the higher price. So if it's price elastic, if I decrease my price, my revenue will go up. And this is really, really important to know, all right? So let's look at this one. I think we looked at this example before. So before I was selling, I was at point A here, okay, and I was selling at $3 a unit, and I was selling 1,000. And this was the example that we used earlier in here. So my total revenue is 3,000, okay. When I cut my price down to 270, I'm here at B, and so I gained 50 extra customers. And so now my revenue is 28. You can see it went down. And so this is what you got. You got 50 extra customers here, okay? Each one paying 270. So that means my total extra revenue is $135 is my extra revenue from those 50 extra. However, these 1,000 people right here would have been willing to pay. So this is my revenue gained. However, these 1,000 people would have been willing to pay $3. So this is this 30-cent decrease. So I lost 30 cents of revenue on these 1,000 people. So I lost $300 in revenue. So and that's, you can see the 300 minus the 135, what I lost plus what I gained is the difference between these two things right here. So this increased revenue here from the extra sales does not make up for what I lost over here. So my total revenue has gone down because, again, this is inelastic. We said this one was inelastic, had a small change. If we look at that same, so now I'm sad, right? I've lost revenue. Dropping my price was not a good idea. I gained a few extra customers, but not enough to make up for this lost revenue right here. If we look at that same one where we had the elastic demand, okay, this is the same. I dropped 30 cents, so I lost 30 cents on these 1,000 people. So here's what I lost. However, I gained 200 extra customers. So the 200 extra customers, each paying $270, is going to give me an extra 540 revenue. So this is what I gained. Stop that. So now I gained 540, I lost 300, but I'm up by 240. So I have gained an extra $240 in revenue. So this is elastic. Now when I drop my price, my total revenue goes up, so I'm happy, right? So now it doesn't go up by 540, right? It goes up by $240. So the gain minus the loss, because you're always going to lose some on those people that would have been willing to pay more. So if it's elastic, dropping my price increases my revenue. And so now I am better off. So That's the simple form of it. But it's such an important concept to know. So as a firm, you have to know whether the demand for your product is elastic or inelastic in order to. And so if it's elastic, you will continue to increase your revenue by dropping your price until you get. It's not even the whole way along. So up here, it might be very elastic, and it's going to get less elastic, and you keep going until it's unit elastic, and that is the perfect part. When a 2% drop in the price causes a 2% increase in the quantity demanded, when you're at that point right there, then dropping your price anymore isn't going to affect your revenue. And if you were to continue to drop it, you could get to this point where dropping is going to lose your revenue. So, and it works the opposite way too. If you're inelastic, you can increase your revenue by increasing your price. Yeah, you'll lose some sales, but not that many. And so, and if the demand for your product is inelastic, you should raise your price to increase your revenue. If the demand for your product is elastic, you should drop your price in order to maximize your revenue until you get to that point where it's unit elastic, and then that's the best you can do revenue wise. And again, we're not even talking about costs. We'll throw those in a little bit later. Okay, and then just briefly, there are other elasticities. People, your sales, the quantity sold, the quantity demanded, will respond to things other than just the price of your product. Okay, so one of them is cross price elasticity. And that is just measured as how much the quantity demanded changes when something else changes, the price of another good in this case. Okay, so substitutes or complements. So you know that your sales will be affected not just by the price you charge, but if there are substitutes with the price of theirs changes, and if there are complements. So those other things are also going to impact your sales. So so it also measures how strong the correlation is there on the substitute or the complements. Remember that substitutes are things that can be used for the same purpose. Complements are things that go together. So substitutes would be Coke and Pepsi. Complements would be hot dogs and hot dog buns. Okay. So the formula is actually the same, except this would be the percentage change in the quantity demanded of Pepsi over the percentage change in the price of Coke, or the percentage change in the quantity demanded of hot dog buns over the percentage change in the price of hot dogs. So, and the midpoint formula is exactly the same, except I'm just going to use the price of a different good. If you get, and now again, the sign matters here. So in price elasticity of demand, we were talking about absolute values and we just ignored the negative sign. But now it matters. So if you get a positive number, then they're substitutes. If you get a negative number, they're complements. And this says if it's 0, it's unrelated. That's not really, you could plug in two things and you'll get a number and it does not mean they're related. Like if the price of smartwatches changes and the quantity of peanut butter went up, it wasn't because of that. So you got to use a little common sense in there. But and the bigger the number, the more the stronger the relationship there between those. And so but the midpoint formula is exactly the same. It's just you plug in the price of the hot dogs and the quantity of the hot dog buns. But other than that, it's exactly the same. Another one is income elasticity. So how much does the quantity sold of a product change when income changes? And so how much does the quantity demanded change when income changes? And if you remember, we talked about income, we talked about normal goods, which means when income goes up, the quantity demanded goes up, and inferior goods when they work in the opposite direction. So this works exactly the same. It's the percentage change in the quantity demanded over the percentage change in the income instead of the price. And again, this is the cause and this is the effect, right? How much, and we're just looking at two different variables. How much does the quantity demanded change when income changes in this case? And it's the same thing. It's, the midpoint formula would be the same. Q2 minus Q1, how much did it change over Q1 plus Q2 divided by 2. And then you put that over the income instead of the price. So income 2 minus income 1 over income 1 plus income 2 divided by 2. And so this is how you get the percentage change in the income. And what did that do? What was the percentage change in the quantity demanded? So the formula works exactly the same way, except I'm sticking in income instead of price. But other than that, it works the same. If it's a positive number, it's a normal good. If it's a negative number, it's an inferior good. And also, if it's positive, but it's less than 1, it's a necessity. So you might buy a little bit more, but you're not going to buy a lot more. If it's positive and it's greater than 1, then it's a luxury good. So now the more I go up, the more I will buy of that. And that is pretty much it for elasticity. So first half is all about that formula and using it and how to use it and how to calculate elasticity. And the second one is what does that mean to us? So we're kind of in our whole section here starting about how businesses make decisions. So this is the first part. You have to understand the elasticity of demand for your product to know how to price your product. And also these other ones, cross-price elasticity and income elasticity, to know how people are going to react, what's going to happen to your sales when these things are changing. And then in the next unit, like I said, we're going to add in costs, and then we're going to put those together really because the goal of any business is to maximize profits. So we're going to kind of build on these ideas to see how businesses make these decisions for how much to produce and how much to charge. So that is Chapter 6 and elasticity.